So today I'm going to be talking about the Second Amendment, or mass civilian armament anyway. I know those concepts are kind of inextricably tied in this country, but I'm not talking from a constitutional law perspective, so maybe mass civilian armament is more accurate, but either way, mass civilian armament, Second Amendment, doesn't fucking matter. For as long as I can remember, the political right in this country has been the bloc that has supported mass civilian armament, supported the Second Amendment, and ostensibly they've supported it on the grounds of fighting tyranny. Now, I have always found this to be somewhat ironic because the political right has also, for as long as I can remember, been the political bloc that wants the government interfering in the most private aspects of people's lives. But that's really neither here nor there, because I'm not talking about the strangeness of the political right in this video, or at least not right this moment. I'll be talking about the, it might come up later. What I'm talking about is kind of the reverse phenomenon. I'm talking about the fact that liberals, not leftists, but the most left-wing bloc that's politically relevant in this country, have always been opposed to mass civilian armament, always been opposed to, if not outright opposed to the Second Amendment, ostensibly wanting to limit it so much as to fundamentally change the nature of gun ownership in this country. And they support limiting gun rights for many reasons. First and foremost, they want less people to be shot, and that's a noble goal. I think that we should all be able to agree it would be good if less people got shot dead. We should all be able to agree on that premise. But there's something going on in this country right now. I assume you know, if you've watched my videos before, what I'm talking about, because I don't ever shut the fuck up about it, even for a minute. I'm talking about the authoritarian threat posed by Donald Trump. So, most liberals seem to recognize this by now. Even ones who just a few months ago, right before Donald Trump started his second term, were saying, oh, you're being hysterical, he'll be bad, but he won't be that bad. It's going to be like Trump round one again. Things are going to suck a little bit, but it will be okay. They're starting to realize that there's actually a serious authoritarian threat posed by Donald Trump. And if you look at what's going on and you recognize that threat, you should really not be calling for restrictions on gun rights right now. So to talk about why that's the case, we have to talk about the nature of authoritarianism and why gun rights are helpful in combating it. So are gun rights helpful in combating authoritarianism because we're going to take our AR-15s and overthrow the government? No. People say, the phrase that people use to make this point, I actually find kind of silly. People will say, well, you can't shoot a tank with an AR-15. And that phrase is kind of silly because, yeah, you can't shoot a tank with an AR-15, but without an infantry escort, a tank is just a big, expensive coffin. And you can shoot an infantry escort with an AR-15. But still, the point being made by that phrase is true. You can't meaningfully defeat the largest and strongest conventional military in the world with small arms. It can't be done. You can't meet the U.S. military in a head-on fight with small arms and win. So when people point this out, they're correct to point out that you can't do that, but they're missing the point of why gun ownership is still an effective tool against authoritarianism. So, to understand why guns are an effective tool against authoritarianism, despite the fact that you can't beat the military in a head-on fight with them, we have to understand what the state is. The state, the government, from a political science perspective, when I was going to school for political science, the definition that was always given of the state is a legitimate monopoly on the use of violence. Now, I would tweak that definition somewhat. First of all, it's not a true monopoly, right? Because even a lot of rather authoritarian states allow some people to use violence, such as self-defense. They allow maybe combat sports, right? That's a use of violence. So it's not a monopoly on violence, it's a monopoly on coercive violence, which I think is a necessary little addendum. And then what about that word legitimate? Well, legitimate according to who? If it's just legitimate according to itself, then that's kind of meaningless, right? If it's legitimate according to international recognition, that's kind of tricky, right? Because up until for several decades, Taiwan was recognized by the international community as the government of all of China, even though it very much was not. And now China is recognized by the international community as ruling over Taiwan, which it very much doesn't. Taiwan has been independent for 80 years. So international recognition isn't always the most accurate notion of government either, right? So instead of a legitimate monopoly on violence, what I would define the state as is an effective monopoly on the use of coercive violence. And it's a very similar meaning, but I think it's an important distinction. So, what constitutes this effective monopoly on the use of coercive violence? What mechanism is that violence done through? Is it the military? Not by and large, no, not domestically. It's the police force. Your local police, your state police, federal police. That is the mechanism by which the U.S. government is given an effective monopoly on the use of coercive violence within its territory. And all the state governments within theirs, so on and so forth. So, right away, we can start to see why civilian armament weakens this effective monopoly. Because any authoritarian measure that's put into place is not on the day-to-day going to be implemented by the military. That's not what the military is there for. And any attempt to use the military as a day-to-day within the United States, especially with our political culture, is likely going to result in mass desertion from the military, mass domestic terrorism, things of that nature that would really, really rather be avoided by an authoritarian state, or any state for that matter. So, even in an authoritarian America, the police apparatus is going to, by and large, be the mechanism by which that authority is carried out. And civilian armament, while a lot of police forces are militarized in the sense that they have a lot of military equipment, they still aren't the military. They still don't have quite that same capability towards violence as the military. So civilian armament does produce kind of a chilling effect on what police forces might be capable of doing, especially because police officers, they're trained to be very, very cautious of their own safety. There's a common expression in regards to police shootings. It's not an expression that I like, but it's an expression that's useful to show their mentality. It's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. Essentially, it's better to shoot somebody and then be tried in court for it than it is to risk your life and die and be carried by 6 pallbearers. So police are very, very cautious. So even if no shot is ever fired at them, the simple knowledge that anyone they are fucking with might have a gun kind of puts a chilling effect on what they might be willing to do, what they might be willing to risk. And say, for example, say we get rid of Lawrence v. Texas, right? And we go back to the criminality of gay sex. In a context where nobody has weapons, a police officer, especially a homophobic police officer, is going to be eminently willing to enforce, to go into people's homes and arrest them for having gay sex, right? Having, just for being gay. But with the knowledge that everybody has weapons, especially if once or twice that such raids do result in officers coming under fire, well, now police have to think, is it worth my life to stop these dudes from fucking each other? Like, those are the kinds of questions that a lot of people don't think about police having, but they're the kind of questions that they always ask. Is this worth risking my life for? That's crucial to understanding the way that understanding that they are constantly asking that question is crucial to understanding how they will behave in a certain situation. So for things like that, mass civilian armament is incredibly helpful to create that chilling effect. Now, other than police, how else would an authoritarian government enforce its effective monopoly on the use of coercive violence? Well, historically, authoritarian and especially totalitarian, but even authoritarian governments tend to outsource a lot of their violence to friendly civilian paramilitary groups. It's not all police and the official police and military who do this violence, who keep people in line with what the authoritarian government wants. It is also, by and large, armed civilians who are in line with the government's goals. And now you might be thinking right now, hearing that, okay, so that is a reason to get rid of mass civilian armament, right? Because, yeah, sure, maybe the police will still have guns, but at the very least, we won't have to deal with these right-wing paramilitaries, right? No. Incorrect. There are, in this country, 7 states, plus Washington, D.C., that have gun registries. These are not the biggest, most gun-owning states that really, really need registries, so they decided to get them. No, these are like the most liberal anti-gun states have implemented gun registries, and the city of Washington, D.C. has done so as well. The MAGA people are all already armed, and they, by and large, don't live in those 7 states or in Washington, D.C. So they are going to have their weapons. It is impossible to disarm them because the government doesn't even know who's armed, and there's hundreds of millions of weapons, something like 500 million guns in civilian hands. So they're going to be armed. There's no stopping MAGA people from being armed. So if we are looking at the threat of right-wing paramilitaries, disarming them is out of the question. Arming ourselves is the way that we defend against that. It is the only way that we defend against that. And yeah, you can't stand up to the military with small arms, but to a paramilitary group that is also armed with small arms, you sure can. You absolutely can, if you arm yourself and organize yourself accordingly. So, will the Second Amendment be used to overthrow the government, like fucking Star Wars, blow up the Death Star, new 1776, all this, that, and the other? No, it won't. The U.S. military is a force unlike any ever seen in the world. You are not going to defeat the U.S. military in an open fight with small arms. You might be able to slightly deter certain actions by them, whatever, but people will say, oh, we lose wars to farmers all the time. Not really. Like, the way the U.S. loses wars is we just kind of get bored of fighting them and go home. Which if you're trying to overthrow the government of the United States, guess what? They're not going to get bored of fighting and go home. So that's kind of out of the question. But what we can do and what we should do is arm ourselves, make sure especially marginalized groups that might be the target of paramilitary violence, of police violence in an authoritarian state, that as many of these people are armed as possible, both to create a chilling effect against violence and to give them the option of defending themselves with violence if it comes to that, if that chilling effect fails. We need to, anyone who is aligned with these groups, anyone who is on the political left, or anyone who just doesn't want this country to become a fucking dictatorship should be armed for the same reason. The only reason that you should not be armed right now is if you believe that if you buy a gun, you're going to kill yourself with it. That's the only reason that you should not be armed right now. It's a dangerous world that we're entering. I wish it wasn't the world that we were entering. It's a little cheesy to reference, fantasy shit in politics, but reminds me a lot of that Lord of the Rings bit, Frodo, I wish I did not have to live in these times. And Gandalf says, that is how everybody who has to live in such times feels. It's not up to us to choose what times we live in, only what we make of with what little time we have, essentially. And I think that that's an important thing to remember right now. If my car's sounds have made this video shitty, I'm sorry. My car has been being a little fucky lately, but I think that this is an important sentiment to get out right now. When I was a younger man, when I was 20, 21, I used to kind of, like a lot of young idealistic men, I would kind of fantasize, right, about the idea of like liberatory violence and all this, that, and the other. But man, now that we're looking at the world that we're in, I don't fucking want that to be the case. I'm 30, almost 31. I'm fucking tired, man. I don't want to have to do violence. I don't want to have to think about having to own a gun to maybe fight for the freedom of me and my loved ones. No one wants this shit less than me, man. But that's the world we live in right now. That's about all I have to say about that.